By the way, I did not video document every single thing here. I did for a few things, but it was mostly just through pictures, because a lot of this process was mad stressful. So I don't want to take out any aggression on camera. First of all, I had to come up with a schematic and try to conceptualize exactly how big that the Toji worm had to be. The ones I could find online were around about 50 inches or whatever. This thing's supposed to be around 6 feet long, so it barely makes the cut. So I ended up buying 2 Toji worms from Amazon, and the plan was just to combine both of them, like extend the tail of the other one to see if it would be long enough to wrap around my body, and then modify it in such a way I can make it posable. But that completely fell through. The form and the looks of it were completely off from what I wanted it to look like, and so were pretty much most of the other purchasable Toji worms that I saw online. They were not in the shape, and I didn't want what they were selling. And I had to bite the bullet and just buy a sewing machine. And so after a little bit of research, not even a little bit of research, just as much research as I could muster up, I ended up getting the Singer M1000 for about $80 or $90 or whatever, the cheaper end of the sewing machines I could have possibly gotten. So from there, I decided, okay, I'm just gonna take this and then figure out how to use this thing, build a schematic, and then watch a bunch of videos that are sort of adjacent to whatever I had to do. So I was watching this video of a girl making like a plushy caterpillar or whatever, and seeing how she dealt with the segments and all this. So I based it off of that, and then I made a few test pieces. I had more than enough material to work with to make 2 of these fucking things. So I ended up making the different segments for the plates on the body, then the little footsies, the fucking legs, the little feet, the fucking caterpillar-like worm feet. And the hardest part was trying to come up with some way to generate a face out of this, because I couldn't figure out for the life of me how to create a 2D schematic for crafting a face that had all these different round oblong ridges and shit. So I have to just go ahead and just take a big block of sponge foam and carve it out meticulously into a rough shape of what I wanted. And then the idea was just to use that as a template and then just sew a pattern around that. But it made me more retarded because what I tried to do was just pin fabric down and then just trace around where I pinned it down, and that didn't work whatsoever. What I should have done was take cellophane, clinging wrap, and then wrap that all around there, then draw that out, then take the clinging wrap off and then cut that out and then overlay that on a piece of fabric. But we're way past that part now, because even though I was able to get through basically most of the worm except the head pretty diligently, with a bunch of different issues happening with the sewing machine, with the bobbin getting messed up, with the fucking hook timer, the way that the needle times, it's the fucking thread's supposed to hook into the needle through this little hook thing that swivels around, and it can be off timed somehow, and I don't know how mine kept having that happen. But figuring out how to figuring out how to fix that was pure hell, and I had to do it multiple times. On top of having to fix jams in the bobbin, having to fix these other constraints that would just pop up anytime that I would never be able to fully fix. It throughout all of that, by the time I got to the head, it was the whole thing just it was dead. The teeth, what are they called, the dog teeth or something on the bottom that are supposed to pull the fabric as you're sewing it, stopped working. It was no longer pulling fabric, it was just stabbing it down, which made the jamming problem impossible to deal with. So the fucking thing broke by the time I reached the ass end of this hell. In any case, what I ended up having to do with the head was make a fabric mache, paper mache, fabric mache thing out of it. I took a bunch of fabric and I just like I super glued it, I hot glued it together in a very like Chucky, Bride of Chucky's sort of stitchy, horrible little horror manner. And I used some kind of like wool material that was really cheap at Hobby Lobby to like put the for like the flaps for the teeth, and then like whatever color for the eyes. So that was that process, and then afterward I had to like screw around using these like hobby wire, and it was like I forget what gauge, I think it was like 40 gauge or something. It was a very hefty wire that I ended up getting at Home Depot, so I could like try to make it as posable as possible. That was one of the most important parts, was just to implement that, and I had to screw around with that a couple of times, because if you add too much stuffing, apparently it becomes a little bit too heavy for the gauge wire to just stay in its proper place. Because when it's wrapped around my body, I don't want it slinking down or moving around too much when I'm moving around, so I had to repeatedly, about 3 or 4 different times, like gut the worm. So I had to gut the worm so that I could make it as light as possible, so that it wouldn't get in the way of like the bendy wire. And I eventually had to take 4 of those at the length of like about 6 feet each, and tape them together so it was nice and uniform, and use the strength of that to hold it together the way I really want it to. And what I also wanted to plan for was to add an extended hook inside of the mouth of the worm, so that I'm able to attach the chain that goes inside of there from like that scene where he attaches a large chain to the inverted Spear of Heaven. So I wanted to be able to replicate that in some way, and then I used like those little like elementary school pipe cleaner fucking craft things, and just stabbed it into his head so I could have the little hairs come out of his head. That concludes the part for the worm. This part was something I was actually looking fucking forward to, because ever since I was a dang old kid, I always loved watching these like craftsman videos of people making replicas of all kinds of like weapons and swords and all that. So this one I was actually prepared for, and not ripping my fucking like testicles off in order to accomplish. So this is probably the most equipment excessive part. I ended up getting a bunch of brushes, spray paint, EVA Foam, and heat gun, contact cement. I have some garden rods here for stability, and I have a plastic chain and a PVC pipe that I got for free because it had no price tag on it. Anywho, I ended up creating another schematic, or at least 2 other schematics, for the different weapons that Toji had, for the inverted Spear of Heaven and the split soul katana. And the split soul katana, I decided to go for the design from the manga, where it looked like it just had like a messy black hilt wrapping on it, and it was what side of the sword, like the top end of the sword, looked like it was a burn victim. Yeah, that rough looking machine. I love that thing. As opposed to the one in the anime, it looks more like a conventional like sword or whatever. It didn't scream to me as cool enough. And because this was my first ever weapon I was making, the more fucked up it looked, the better I was going to do at that, because I was going to fuck it up. So, I ended up creating the schematic. I ended up drawing at least 2 or 3 different schematic sheets. One that was just the schematic sheet itself, and then another one that I traced over and made into the shape that I wanted to mask over, and then trace onto the EVA Foam that I got, which I ended up having to get some more different thicknesses of the EVA Foam, because the Mark 1 for the katana, which is the one I chose to do first because it felt like, well, it has less curves to it, or it's less complex, so I'll just go with that one as first. That first trial did not go so well. I did end up keeping the inner skeleton of it, the part where it just has like the hilt and just the garden rod that I had to bend in the shape. I was able to just take those and like detach them from the first mark, and then the second try went a lot smoother. I ended up having to do a lot of rougher techniques. I tried to use reference to like a bamboo sword that I had to see how long it needed to be. I ended up getting the new EVA Foam, the black one that was like a lot thicker or whatever, and I used 3 layers. The one in the middle being the thickest layer, and then the ones on the outside being thinner. I believe those were like the 5mm ones. I think the one on the inside was probably around 10mm or something. I forgot the actual size of it because I threw away the fucking like wrapping it was in. But I ended up figuring out how the contact like cement worked, and then started actually putting these into different segments for the sword properly. One thing I didn't master whatsoever was trying to cut at a particular angle so it would also glue at that at said angle. It was very difficult to keep as consistent as possible, especially with the thicker foam, and no matter how much I sharpened that motherfucker, the utility knife, it just it had to, whatever happened. And what happened was that there was the gaps where I tried to create like a good, like perfect angle, it started collapsing in certain pockets, which I then had to compensate for by going ahead and just getting some what was it called again? So I had to just go and get some air dry fucking clay foam thing, and which was actually pretty fun to play with. It was very malleable. It worked really well. I just had to add water to it a little bit if I wanted to be more malleable, and that did a lot of good for the small cracks that I had in between some of the seams here. So I went ahead and just basically like coated the sword with a bunch of that, and then I used that same foam clay to sculpt the details that were like rough on the top of the sword. And the method there was just sort of do it in a bunch of different squiggly lines or whatever, just try to make it look like it was just covered in a bunch of vines or veins, similar to what I've seen on like one of those swords I saw on Etsy. Or I try to like recreate whatever that method might have been. Mine ended up being a lot more detailed. It had a lot more pockets in it, but I had to just let it rest for apparently like I guess 24 hours to let it dry. And when it dries, it doesn't feel like rock solid or anything. It's kind of, it's foam clay, so it does feel a bit spongy or whatever. But it all stuck together pretty well. I didn't have to like glue anything down or anything. I never had any problems with that. And from there, I ended up working on the inverted spear of heaven, which, because of its smaller size, it was about 2 feet. And it's probably a little less than 2 feet, but around 2 feet in like length total. It was a hell of a lot easier to work with. So despite it was like shaped like a storage garage key, it was a lot easier to work with. I enjoyed it. The little emblem thing on the middle, I just used a tiny X-acto knife and just like carved that out and took my heat gun to it, which sort of expanded part of the areas that I like carved out. So I didn't have to like make like any crazy indentions or like an embroidery on my own or anything. I just used a singular cut and then just let the heat gun do the rest. Mark out some of the beveling, and then I would just go in with my X-acto knife and start jagging some of that out really roughly, and then I would use my Dremel to smooth out a lot of those areas, and it came out very satisfactory. I'm very happy with the whole thing of that. This one ended up being 3 segments. I think the thicknesses of them were all 5mm. And the garden rod, which I was using again for this, the garden rod thing is almost perfectly like just above that. So when it was done and it was all glued together, there is like a ridge or an indentation in the middle, but I do not care. It doesn't matter to me whatsoever. I give not a single fuck about the tiny ridge that's in there. It's a minor imperfection. It's hardly, I don't care. But the little ring on the bottom of the inverted spear of heaven, I wasn't sure. That was one of the things that kept me up at night, thinking about how to properly fasten that to this weapon, because without it swiveling a bunch. And I kept coming up with a bunch of different concepts and a bunch of different things that did not work. It was just, again, it would just swivel around back and forth aimlessly, and I wanted to be nice and just like stiffly, firmly in there. So what I ended up doing, I created a Wiccan relic from ancient times, and basically took a bunch of like smaller hobby wire and combined it with bigger hobby wire, and just made it as stiff as I possibly could, and jammed it through the middle of what I had there, of that the PVC structure. And to my credit, it worked, and once it was painted, it was kind of seamless. But before we get to that part, clay had finally dried on the sword, and so here I am going to my Dremel tool with various bits, and I used like the skid. I used the large like cylindrical bit and the smaller one that you see here to refine the details in that part of the sword. Once I was done with that, it was absolutely time to get to some of the parts I was absolutely looking for, the latter half, which was painting. So I just grabbed some old, I just grabbed like a fucking thing from outside and just used that as a platform to start spray painting everything. So I used like a black primer to spray everything down first, and then after that I went in with the metallic silver spray paint. It went over a bunch of the little like notches and details, like the little battle damage parts that I had on some of the blades, on the ends of the blades. My idea to fix that was just to take some India ink that I had, and I used that India ink and just sort of like diluted it partially in water. It ended up tinting the blade like a more like sort of browner hue or whatever, probably because it's India ink. It ended up tinting it a bit browner and like sort of like a partially rustic like iron sort of look, and that the whole thing kind of came together. It brought out a lot of the different divots and stuff that I had inside, or like that I had on each blade. I used the metallic gold spray paint for the other parts of the inverted spear of heaven. Now it came to basically the last part, which was the hand wrapping around the handle and yeah. So I just used some what looked, I don't know, it was like burlap material or something, and I just roughly cut through all of it. I wrapped it around the handles, I test wrapped it, and I finally had a final wrap using a bunch of like minuscule dabs of like hot glue to wrap around the entire handle. For little like fairy haired little fucking fraying parts of the fabric, I ended up just lighting on fire so I could get a bunch of those out of the way before I did the final paint. And I ended up using some of the fabric paint that I had already had left over from the Luffy cosplay that I made, and I diluted it, again in water, painted over some of the handles. Only I did that for the inverted spear of heaven. The one that I did for the split soul katana, I just used India ink again. It did do the exact job that I wanted it to do. It looked nice and like it looked like used, like an actual old weapon, which is exactly what I was hoping for. Now it's pretty much in its completed form. The last thing to do with the sword was just to use some of the fur materials that I got, completing the demonic Tet Saiga look. That then is pretty much the end of that build, and all the other stuff that I didn't really take any pictures of was just the outfit that Toji has, which is very easy. The easiest fucking part of Toji's cosplay was just buying a compression tee and then getting yoga pants and then putting the belt inside of the yoga pants in like the way that it looks in the anime, and then getting like the really shitty Chinese kung fu shoes that don't fit right no matter what you do. I also had to like dye the pants because they were white and you could see right through them, but once I dyed them more gray, which is what Toji's pants usually looks like, that pretty much solved the problem. That took probably the greater part of, I'd say, 2 weeks or something of just straight work. It felt like it was 2 weeks. It might have been shorter. I will not go back and check. That was kind of a nightmare, but now that it's all done, oh, thank God. And as much work as I put into this thing, my work isn't done entirely, because the other complex issue, which makes doing any of the art shit that I normally do kind of like insanely impossibly exhausting to focus on at the moment is the exercise portion of this. And though I'm not gonna reach the same physique as Toji himself at all, I'm not gonna grow another like 5 inches and then like gain like what 80 pounds worth of muscle on like my upper body to comfortably fit inside the compression tee. The goal is to be without any jiggle or flab, and since the last month since recording this, I guess I have lost about 10 pounds, so down from like 178 to 168. Fluctuating, give or take, 3 pounds because of like, I don't know, water retention or some retarded shit like that. I don't know how that works, but and then at some point I have to like probably trim my hair a little bit just to fit into the role of Toji. I just probably just like take off a couple of inches from certain areas around like my ears and around the back and the side or whatever. That's the full story. That's what I've been doing all this time, and only now have I been able to like go back and start drawing some more pages of the comic. And then once that particular project is done, oh, I'll never tell. I have no fucking clue. I have no plans after that. I just want to get done the things I've always wanted to get done for like years now. Not like I wanted to do the Toji cosplay for years. I just mean like getting in shape and then finishing old shit that I should have had done like long ago. Done. That there is the end, and there's plenty of like some exclusive stuff still on Patreon at the moment. I haven't updated Patreon as much for the any of the new comic pages that I draw until I've completely dealt with a comfortable amount that I want to share publicly while I show a bunch of like the insider stuff, because I don't want anything to get leaked before it's ready for the public viewing, if you can understand that. So in any case, I have been me, and you 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 you're fucking